Grimsby, a port town on the east coast of England and home to around 90,000 people. During the 12th century, the town became one of the biggest fishing ports in the country and kept growing, holding on to that status for hundreds of years. During the Second World War, the town became the largest base for minesweepers in the UK. However, the Cod Wars and the decline of the fishing industry in the 1980s decimated the fishing industry and brought the town to where it is now. It's fair to say that Grimsby has been in decline for a number of years, and ever since I've lived in the town, the situation hasn't seemed to have improved. In contrast to the glory days, the town is one of the poorest places in the UK, with the East Marsh being the second most deprived council ward in the UK. Nowadays you're more likely to see this town presented by programmes such as Channel 4's Skint, and films like Sacha Baron Cohen's controversial Grimsby. However, the town wasn't always like this. To understand why people feel frustrated in modern Grimsby, it's important to understand what the town once was, and its understated importance to the UK as a whole. The first fish docks in Grimsby were completed in 1856, with the last docks being finished in 1879. In 1857 there were 22 vessels stationed at Grimsby, growing exponentially to 112 just 6 years later. By the 1950s the town was laying claim to the title of the largest fishing port in the world. Then came the Cod Wars with Iceland, running on and off from 1958 to 1976. This dispute was centred around fishing rights in territorial waters in the seas around Iceland. The wars ended in Iceland gaining an extra 200 nautical miles of fishing territory. This came alongside the implementation of the EU's Common Fisheries Policy, which set quotas on how much fish could be caught and where, severely limiting the amount of fish Grimsby's fishermen could catch. At the time they were landing 18,000 tonnes of fish a year, with 13,000 tonnes of that coming from Iceland. The decline of the fishing industry, combined with economic problems, was very reminiscent with that of mining towns in the 1980s. Unemployment rose, investment disappeared and left a skills gap, which led to the Grimsby we see today. It's now one of the 61% of fishing communities in the UK that's deprived and in desperate need of investment. In a recent article, The Guardian described Grimsby's story as depressingly familiar. A town beset by social and economic problems, feeble attempts at regeneration and chronic underinvestment. While this could apply to any town in England, it does seem that Grimsby gets a lot more media attention than many other places. One recent example was the Channel 4 TV programme Skint, which made its way to nearby Scunthorpe a few years before. It focused on the struggle of people living on universal credit, and featured people who shoplifted and resorted to prostitution to make ends meet. Then came the release of Sacha Baron Cohen's film Grimsby, in which he plays a football hooligan from the town. The scenes that take place there paint it as a rubbish-strewn ghetto, beset by drunken violence and children drinking beer in broad daylight. The bashing of the town doesn't just come from TV though. Recently, website Gizmodo ran the headline "Grimsby is the worst place in the UK for pretty much everything," and the town was recently revealed to have the unhealthiest high street in the UK. In 2016, the town was named the worst place to live in England, with it being described as a god-awful hellhole and full of slumlords. But is the town really that bad of a place to live? Or is the negative media portrayal being blown out of proportion?
I'm not to blame it onto any government, I'm not, because I think it stems back to maybe even as far as the 1950s or beyond as such. But let's face it, Grimsby was one of the premier fishing ports, it was. There was a lot of money about then. Millionaires row as such, people who was involved in the fishing industry as such, and people used to have a really good time in those days. Unfortunately, it bred a lot of things like alcoholism, etc. and everything and that, because people was away for a long period of work and that. So when that fishing industry declined, this money supply disappeared from the town, it did. Obviously it's been replaced by the frozen food industry, but even so, that is not as strong as it used to be, it's not. We're struggling to find really good employees to come in the area to generate, give people aspirations as such.
Steve is the ward councillor for the East Marsh ward in the town and has lived in the ward for over 20 years. He works with many local charities and listens to many residents' concerns on a daily basis, and he says the town has now reached a crisis point.
We've got record levels of poverty, we've got people falling into debt, massively into debt. We need potentially an all-party commission to overcome this problem. And such, we're heading for a period where we're potentially going into recession. It's been announced today that the economy is contracted by 0.2%. If we're not careful, if we don't listen to the public, if we don't get together and resolve this problem, there's going to be more and more people going to food banks as such. We've just heard the last food bank is about to close or potentially about to close in Grimsby. So we've got problems we have. And it's time that all parties got together to resolve this issue.
So, with the town being at a crisis point, what's being done about it? So, plans for regeneration in the town are afoot. The town's Green New Deal, signed this year, will see a huge growth in the wind turbine industry, which is calling Grimsby home. There's also plans to regenerate Freeman Street on the East Marsh, an area which is in need of particular investment and is known for its chronic poverty. Councillor John Fenty is the man who's in charge of regeneration for the local council, and he's excited about the future.
So there's lots of good stuff going on. We've of course got the renewable sector, which is growing alarmingly, which is fantastic. We've got the support vessels now leaving from Grimsby, which has substituted the need for the waterways, so that's fantastic. And you'll see now that we are classified as the biggest wind estuary actually in the country and possibly in the world. With regard to the town deal as an example, there's a sum bandied around between 67 and 80 million potentially available to the council, but it's subject to being able to deliver robustly, which is something that this area has failed to do so far. It is our challenge, and I'm going to live up to that challenge because regeneration is my responsibility to make sure that we do fast-track projects and deliver and see more done on the ground.
Councillor Fenty is well aware of the negative image that Grimsby has around the country, and says it's not just about adding new things into the town, but it's improving what's already there as well.
There are some negative connotations related to Grimsby. As I say, the fish docks is run down. There's a lot of work to do there. We've got a few hotspots that need investment and a facelift, to say the least, particularly on the arterial route into Grimsby, the A180. When you look to the left, we've got the dilapidated ice factory. That's a listed building. That brings problems in itself because whilst a lot of people think it should just be removed from the face of the earth, clearly when it's got a listing grade 2, you can't do that, and we've got to look at a regeneration project for that. And certainly, the route into Grimsby, the arterial routes, we have to address because that's the image, that's the face of the town.
While there are plans in place for regeneration, it's fair to say that frustration from the residents here has reached boiling point. Back in the 2016 Brexit referendum, the majority of people here voted to leave the EU in a rising anti-establishment feeling. In one sense, it was sending a message to the EU over the fishing policies that contributed to the downfall of the industry here. On the other hand, it was a message to our politicians that change was desperately needed. Then came the local elections this year. Since the North East Lincolnshire Council Authority was created, it has been in the hands of Labour or no overall control. This year, however, it changed for the first time to the Conservatives, even though they suffered huge losses nationally over Brexit. It's an interesting shift in a town which is a staunch Labour heartland, so what needs to change? Is there an anti-establishment feeling in the town?
I think there is a sea change. People are so dissatisfied with not being listened to over the years. I mean, the Grimsby swimming pool, where it was relocated to, the potential closure of the ice rink, which was reversed because of Conservative pressures. When all said and done, people haven't been listened to, and they do feel they've been ignored and things have happened without their principal blessing. I mean, of course, they appoint us to make decisions on their behalf, knowing all of the facts. But when you're so out of kilter with the public, you're going to see a sea change in politics, and that is what's happened locally. It's important for politicians to wake up, smell the coffee, and actually seek to deliver that which is more in kilter with what the public want.
I've lived in the West Marsh until I was age of 22. I've lived in the East Marsh, so I've lived in the two marshes the whole of my life. And to be honest, residents are fed up of politicians, they are. And that's the reason why myself and the other two Lib Dem ward councillors, we get elected. We listen to those residents, we act on their requests as such, and to be honest, we need to stop playing politics with those people out there. They don't want it. They want people who work for them and hopefully address some of their issues. That's what residents want.
Grimsby's local Labour MP Melanie On unfortunately wasn't available to be filmed, but did provide a statement saying that she agreed the successive government have let the town down, and now it's time to unite across parties to sort out the town's problems. So it seems like plans for regeneration in the town are afoot, and it seems like Grimsby's future could brighten. But we have been here before, and we'll just have to wait to see whether these plans come to fruition and change the image of Grimsby for the good.